While clearing my attic, I found a dusty box with my name on it. Inside were photos of my husband with a child I'd never seen. Then the lights went out, and I heard. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. The dusty attic ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed up one final time, determined to finish clearing out 40 years of accumulated memories. At 67, I was finally ready to downsize, to simplify our lives before David and I entered our golden years together. The afternoon sun streamed through the small attic window, casting long shadows across boxes labeled Christmas decorations, David's college papers, and kids' school projects. It should have been a nostalgic journey through our family's history. That's when I saw it. A weathered cardboard box tucked behind the old Christmas tree, partially hidden by a dusty tarp. What caught my attention wasn't the box itself, but the faded label written in David's careful handwriting, "For Margaret, when you're ready." My heart skipped. In all our years together, David had never left me surprise gifts hidden away. He was practical, straightforward, the type of man who gave flowers on anniversaries and appliances for birthdays. I pulled the box toward me, surprised by its weight. The tape had yellowed with age, suggesting it had been here for years. As I carefully opened it, my hands began to tremble. Inside were dozens of photographs, and the first one I saw stopped my world completely. There was my husband David looking younger, happier somehow, with his arms wrapped around a beautiful woman I had never seen before. But it wasn't just any woman. She was holding a little girl with David's unmistakable green eyes and that same dimpled smile that had captured my heart 43 years ago. My name is Margaret Thompson, and until that moment, I thought I knew everything about my life. I had spent 4 decades building what I believed was a perfect marriage with the man I loved more than breathing itself. I was the woman who woke up every morning at 5:30 a.m. to make David's coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream, served in his favorite blue mug. I was the wife who gave up my teaching career when David's business started taking off, who moved from Ohio to Texas to California following his opportunities, who never complained when his work trips got longer or when he started coming home later each night. In our neighborhood, I was known as the woman who organized every block party, who brought casseroles to new families, and who had turned our front yard into a showcase of roses that neighbors would walk by just to admire. I volunteered at the local library every Tuesday, helped coordinate the annual church fundraiser, and never missed a single one of our grandchildren's baseball games or dance recitals. Friends often told David how lucky he was to have such a devoted wife. And he would smile and agree, wrapping his arm around my shoulders in that protective way that made me feel cherished. I had lived my entire adult life believing that love meant sacrifice, that a good wife puts her husband's dreams before her own, that loyalty and devotion would naturally be reciprocated. I measured my worth by David's happiness, his success, his comfort. When people asked what I wanted for myself, I genuinely couldn't answer, because somewhere along the way I had forgotten that I was supposed to want things too. But as I stared at that photograph of my husband embracing a family I never knew existed, everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and myself was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Before that terrible discovery in the attic, my life followed a rhythm as predictable and comforting as a favorite song. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., my internal clock would wake me without need for an alarm. I would slip quietly out of bed, careful not to disturb David, and pad barefoot to our kitchen where the coffee maker was already programmed to start brewing. The house in those early hours belonged entirely to me, peaceful, warm, filled with the gentle sounds of our home settling into another day. I would curl up in my favorite chair by the kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint our backyard in shades of gold while I read the morning paper. David would appear around 7 a.m., hair tousled from sleep, wearing the navy blue robe I had bought him 3 Christmases ago. He would kiss the top of my head. a gesture so routine yet intimate that it still made me smile after all these years. "Morning, beautiful," he would mumble, and I would already be standing to prepare his breakfast. Scrambled eggs cooked soft, wheat toast cut diagonally, orange juice in the tall glass, coffee in his favorite blue mug that our daughter Sarah had made in high school pottery class. Our home was a testament to 4 decades of shared memories. The living room walls displayed a carefully curated gallery of our life together. Our wedding photo, where we both looked impossibly young and hopeful. Pictures from David's MBA graduation, where I stood proudly beside him in my best dress. Snapshots of our children taking their first steps, losing their first teeth, graduating from high school and college. The mantel held photos from family vacations. That trip to Yellowstone where it rained every day, but we laughed until our sides hurt. The beach house rental where we taught our grandchildren to build sandcastles. Last year's Thanksgiving where 3 generations crowded around our dining room table. Every Tuesday, I tended to my rose garden, the pride of our neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson from next door would often lean over the fence to compliment the blooms, and I would cut her a small bouquet to brighten her kitchen table. "You have such a gift, Margaret," she would say, and I would beam with the satisfaction of creating something beautiful. Thursdays were for grocery shopping at the same store where I'd been shopping for 15 years, where the checkout clerks knew me by name and asked about David's business and our grandchildren's school activities. My weekly phone calls with our adult children were scheduled and cherished rituals. Sunday mornings with our son Michael in Denver, Tuesday evenings with our daughter Sarah in Phoenix. I kept detailed notes about their lives in a small journal: Michael's promotion at the engineering firm, Sarah's youngest starting kindergarten, the vacation plans they were making. I was the family historian, the keeper of birthdays and anniversaries, the one who remembered which grandson preferred chocolate cake and which granddaughter was allergic to strawberries. Evenings were my favorite time. After dinner, David and I would sit together on our front porch swing, watching neighbors walk their dogs and children ride bicycles up and down our quiet street. David would tell me about his day, the clients he had met, the projects he was working on, the funny conversation he had overheard at lunch. I would share the small details of my day, the book I was reading, the phone call from my sister, the new recipe I wanted to try. These conversations felt like gentle prayers of gratitude for the life we had built together. "Look at those two," I once heard our neighbor Mr. Peterson tell his wife, still acting like newlyweds after all these years. And it was true. I felt genuinely blessed to have found my soulmate, to have created this beautiful, peaceful life where love and routine intertwined like climbing roses on a garden trellis. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday morning in March, so subtle I almost missed it entirely. I was arranging fresh tulips in our kitchen vase when David's phone rang. Instead of answering it at the breakfast table as he always did, he glanced at the screen, his expression shifting slightly, and said, "I need to take this in my study." He disappeared behind the closed door, leaving his coffee to grow cold and his morning paper unread. Through the thin walls, I could hear the muffled sound of his voice, but the tone was different somehow. Softer, more intimate. When he emerged 20 minutes later, I asked casually, "Everything okay, honey?" He paused for just a fraction of a second too long before answering, "Just business stuff, Margaret. Nothing for you to worry about." But David had retired from his consulting firm 8 months ago. What business calls could he possibly be getting? Over the following weeks, these mysterious phone calls became a pattern. They always came at odd hours, during our morning coffee, in the middle of our evening news, once even during our granddaughter's birthday party. Each time, David would excuse himself, close the door, and speak in those same hushed, careful tones. When I mentioned it to my sister Linda during our weekly call, she laughed it off. "Maybe he's planning something special for your anniversary," she suggested. "You know how secretive men can be about surprises." I wanted to believe her, but other small things began to accumulate like dust in corners I hadn't noticed before. David started taking long showers in the evening instead of his usual quick morning routine. He would disappear for hours on Saturday mornings, claiming he was running errands or meeting old colleagues for coffee. Which colleagues? I would ask, genuinely curious about his social life, but his answers were always vague. You don't know them, he would say, already reaching for his car keys. Just some guys from the old neighborhood. The hardware store trips became particularly puzzling. David would announce he needed to pick up something for a home repair project, but he would return 3 or 4 hours later with nothing more than a small pack of screws or a single light bulb. When I offered to come along, suggesting we could grab lunch afterward or make it a little date, he would decline quickly. "It's boring stuff, Margaret. You'd hate it. Why don't you work in your garden instead?" His eagerness to keep me home felt strange, like he was protecting me from something, or protecting something from me. One evening, I was putting away his laundry when I noticed his cologne sitting on the dresser. It wasn't the familiar scent he had worn for years, the woody aftershave I had given him every Christmas. This was something new, something expensive and sophisticated that I had never seen before. When I asked about it, he shrugged and said he had picked it up on a whim. "Thought I'd try something different," he explained, but he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. The most unsettling change was how David seemed to be pulling away during our evening conversations on the porch, where once he would share detailed stories about his day, now his responses became shorter, more distracted. He would check his phone frequently, claiming he was reading news articles, but I caught glimpses of text message notifications that he would quickly swipe away. When I tried to engage him in our usual discussions about the grandchildren or our upcoming anniversary plans, he seemed physically present, but emotionally distant, as if part of his mind was somewhere else entirely. I began to feel like I was losing my husband in tiny increments, one mysterious phone call and unexplained absence at a time. But I had no idea why or to what. I spent the next several weeks actively fighting against my own instincts, determined to prove to myself that I was imagining problems where none existed. Every suspicious behavior had to have a perfectly reasonable explanation, and I became an expert at creating them. When David received another one of those mysterious phone calls during our morning coffee, I convinced myself he was probably helping a former colleague navigate retirement challenges. After all, David had always been the person people turned to for advice. It made perfect sense that someone would be calling him regularly for guidance. The long absences became David needing space to adjust to retirement in my carefully reconstructed narrative. I read articles online about how difficult the transition from working life could be for men, how they sometimes needed to rediscover their identity and purpose. Of course, he would want to spend time with old friends, to feel useful and connected to his professional past. I was being selfish and clingy to expect him to include me in every aspect of his social life. A healthy marriage required independence, I reminded myself. We had been practically joined at the hip for 40 years. Maybe we both needed some breathing room. I threw myself into planning our 40th anniversary celebration with renewed determination, as if organizing the perfect party could somehow restore the perfect marriage I was afraid we were losing. I spent hours researching restaurants, comparing menus and wine lists, finally settling on the elegant country club where we had celebrated so many milestones over the years. I ordered custom invitations with our wedding photo printed in sepia tones, and carefully compiled a guest list of everyone who mattered to us. This would be our renewal, our recommitment to each other, proof that whatever distance had crept between us could be bridged with intention and love. When friends mentioned they hadn't seen David at recent neighborhood gatherings or church events, I became his defense attorney, crafting explanations with the skill of a practiced storyteller. "He's been feeling a bit under the weather," I would say with a concerned wife's gentle smile. "You know how men are about admitting they're not feeling well." Or, "David's been so busy with some consulting projects, you know how hard it is for these ambitious men to truly retire." I delivered these explanations with such conviction that I almost believed them myself. I scheduled a romantic dinner reservation at the Italian restaurant where we had our first date and spent an entire afternoon shopping for the perfect anniversary gift. I finally settled on an expensive watch with an engraving that read, "To my husband, my best friend, my everything. Forever yours, Margaret." The salesperson complimented my choice, saying it was clear I was deeply in love with my husband. 40 years and still acting like newlyweds, I told her proudly, and in that moment I genuinely felt proud of what we had built together. When David seemed distracted during our evening conversations, I filled the silence with cheerful chatter about our grandchildren, upcoming holiday plans, and neighborhood gossip. If he wasn't as engaged as usual, it was simply because he was tired. If he checked his phone more frequently, he was probably just getting used to having more free time to browse the internet. If he seemed emotionally distant, it was temporary. All marriages went through phases, and we would work through whatever was troubling him. I became a master at explaining away red flags, at choosing comfort over truth, at protecting my fairy tale even when the evidence was mounting that it had already ended. In my desperation to preserve what we had, I was willing to accept less attention, less intimacy, less honesty, as long as I could keep believing we were still the couple everyone envied. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I was moving a load of David's clothes from the washer to the dryer, humming softly to myself, while I sorted through his shirts and pants. It was one of those mundane domestic tasks I had performed thousands of times over 4 decades of marriage, so routine that my hands moved automatically while my mind wandered to the grocery list I needed to make for dinner. As I shook out David's khaki pants to check the pockets, before tossing them in the dryer, my fingers encountered something crumpled in the front pocket. Without thinking much about it, I pulled out what I assumed would be a forgotten receipt or a piece of gum. Instead, my hand emerged holding a small piece of construction paper, the kind children use for art projects at school. My heart stopped. It was a crayon drawing, clearly made by a young child's hand. The paper showed a simple house with a crooked chimney, a yellow sun with rays extending in all directions, and 2 stick figures holding hands in front of the house. One figure was tall with brown hair, wearing what looked like a blue shirt. The other was much smaller, with curly hair drawn in wild scribbles of brown crayon, wearing a pink dress. Above the tall figure, written in the careful block letters of a child who was just learning to write, were the words, "Daddy David." Above the smaller figure was written Emma. I stared at the drawing for what felt like an eternity, my hands beginning to tremble. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Our grandchildren were all boys, Michael Jr., who was 12, and little Tommy, who was 8. Neither of them had ever drawn pictures of David, and certainly neither of them called him Daddy David. They had always called him Grandpa, just as they called me Grandma. Besides, this drawing was clearly made by a much younger child, someone still in that phase where people are drawn as simple stick figures with circle heads. Maybe David was volunteering somewhere? Perhaps at a local elementary school or community center where children might have given him drawings? But David had never mentioned any volunteer work, and in 40 years of marriage, he had never shown any particular interest in working with children outside of our own family. He was wonderful with our grandchildren, but he had always said that raising kids was a young person's game. I turned the paper over, hoping to find some clue that would make sense of this discovery. On the back, in the same childish handwriting, was a date from just 3 weeks ago, and below that, "I love you, Daddy David, from Emma." My legs suddenly felt weak, and I had to sit down on the laundry room floor, still clutching the drawing. The rational part of my brain kept searching for innocent explanations. Maybe Emma was the daughter of one of David's former clients who had given him this drawing as a thank you gift. Maybe she was the child of a neighbor I hadn't met. But the word daddy felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Children didn't call random adults daddy. They certainly didn't draw family pictures with adults they barely knew. I sat there surrounded by the familiar smell of fabric softener and the gentle hum of the dryer, holding this small piece of paper that seemed to contain the power to destroy my entire world. Part of me wanted to throw it away immediately, to pretend I had never found it, to continue living in the safe bubble of denial I had been constructing. But I couldn't unknow what I now knew. Somewhere out there was a little girl named Emma, who loved someone she called Daddy David, and that someone appeared to be my husband. I never made it to the attic that day by choice. The little girl's drawing had haunted me for 2 weeks, hidden in my jewelry box like a ticking time bomb. Every time David kissed my forehead or said he loved me, I felt that piece of paper burning through the bedroom floor above us. I had convinced myself I was being paranoid, that there was some innocent explanation I hadn't considered yet. I was actually looking for Christmas decorations to donate when I spotted that mysterious box with my name on it. But now, surrounded by hundreds of photographs scattered across the dusty attic floor, there was no more room for doubt, no more space for hopeful explanations. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and absolutely clear. The photos spanned 15 years of a life I never knew existed. David with a stunning woman who looked to be in her 30s, blonde and vibrant in ways I had forgotten I used to be. But it was the little girl that broke my heart completely. She was David's daughter in every possible way. The same green eyes that had captivated me when we first met, the same mischievous smile, even the same way of tilting her head when she laughed. In every single photograph, this child looked at David with the pure, uncomplicated adoration that only a beloved father receives. There were birthday parties where David wore party hats and helped blow out candles, Christmas mornings where he sat on the floor assembling toys while the little girl bounced excitedly beside him, school plays where he sat in the front row, beaming with pride, family vacations to Disney World, to beaches I had never seen, to mountain cabins where they roasted marshmallows around campfires. In every image, David looked genuinely, completely happy, more relaxed and joyful than I had seen him in our home for years. The woman in the photographs wasn't just some random affair. She was clearly the center of a whole other family, a whole other life that David had been living parallel to ours. In several photos, she wore what appeared to be an engagement ring, and in the most recent ones, a wedding band that made my stomach lurch. Had David married this woman? Was my husband a bigamist on top of everything else? At the bottom of the final box, I found official documents that confirmed my worst fears. Emma Claire Thompson. David had given this child my maiden name. The birth certificate listed David as the father, with an address I didn't recognize in a town 30 miles away. There were school enrollment forms, medical records, insurance documents. This wasn't just an affair that had produced a child. This was a completely separate family that David had been supporting, nurturing, and loving for 15 years while coming home to me and pretending nothing had changed. As I held Emma's birth certificate in my trembling hands, the attic lights suddenly flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. In that moment of disorientation, I heard footsteps on the ladder below, and then David's voice, closer than I expected, drifting up through the darkness. "Now you know." He had been waiting for me to find this. The box labeled, "For Margaret, when you're ready," wasn't hidden by accident. It was placed where I would eventually discover it. David had wanted me to learn the truth, but he had been too much of a coward to tell me himself. Instead, he had orchestrated this horrible moment, allowing me to uncover 15 years of lies and deception in the most devastating way possible. "How long have you been standing there?" I whispered into the darkness, my voice barely audible even to myself. David climbed up into the attic, his face illuminated by the flashlight on his phone. In that harsh white light, I could see an expression I had never witnessed before. Not guilt, not shame, but something that looked almost like relief, as if he had been carrying the weight of this secret for so long that its exposure felt like freedom, even though it was destroying me in the process. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his voice eerily calm for someone whose double life had just been exposed. "Come downstairs, Margaret. We can't do this up here." The conversation that followed in our living room, surrounded by 40 years of family photos that now felt like elaborate lies, revealed a betrayal so calculated and extensive that it made simple infidelity look innocent by comparison. David didn't just have another family, he had been systematically robbing our future to build theirs. "Sarah thinks I'm divorced," he began, as if this somehow made everything less terrible. "I told her you and I were business partners, that our marriage ended years ago, but we stayed together for financial reasons. She has no idea she's the other woman." The casual way he said Sarah's name, as if I should know who she was, as if she were a mutual friend rather than the woman who had been sleeping with my husband for 15 years, made my stomach turn. But the financial betrayal was what truly took my breath away. David had been supporting his second family using money from our joint savings account, our retirement funds, and our home equity line of credit. Emma's private school tuition, $25,000 a year for the past 8 years, had been paid from the college fund we had established for our grandchildren. The down payment on Sarah's house had come from the vacation fund we had been building for our retirement cruise around Europe. "How much?" I managed to whisper, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "About $400,000 over the years," David said, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe a little more." $400,000. Nearly half of our life savings, gone. Money I had helped earn through my years of teaching. Money we had saved by living modestly, by driving old cars and taking modest vacations, by choosing generic groceries and clipping coupons. Money that was supposed to ensure we could afford the medical care we might need as we aged, that was supposed to be our legacy for our children and grandchildren. But David wasn't finished. The worst revelation was yet to come. "I've already consulted with a divorce attorney," he continued, his voice taking on the businesslike tone he used when discussing financial investments. "I'll be filing papers after our anniversary party. My lawyer thinks we can argue that you've become increasingly unstable over the past few years. Forgetful, paranoid, maybe showing early signs of dementia. It would reduce the alimony I'd have to pay and give me a better case for keeping more of the assets." The cruelty of this plan left me speechless. He had been planning to destroy not just our marriage, but my reputation, my credibility, my mental health in the eyes of our family and friends. The anniversary celebration I had been planning so carefully was intended to be his farewell performance as the devoted husband, his final act before claiming I had lost my mind. "Our children will believe you," I said, my voice barely audible. David's pause told me everything I needed to know. "I've already started laying the groundwork," he admitted. "Small comments about your memory, your mood swings. They're concerned about you, Margaret. They'll understand when I tell them I can't take care of you anymore." He had been poisoning our children against me while I planned our anniversary party. After David left the house that night, claiming he was going to give me space to process everything, I collapsed on our kitchen floor, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had just been revealed as an elaborate lie. The cold ceramic tiles pressed against my cheek as sobs racked my body, each breath feeling like it might be my last. I had cried before, in my life, but never like this. Never with the devastating knowledge that everything I believed about myself, my marriage, and my future had been systematically destroyed by the person I trusted most in the world. I looked up at our kitchen walls covered with 40 years of memories that now felt like evidence in a criminal case. There was the photo from our 25th anniversary cruise where David had his arm around me as we watched the sunset from the ship's deck. I remembered feeling so grateful that night, so blessed to have found my soulmate. How naive I had been. While I was falling asleep next to him in that tiny cruise cabin, was he thinking about Sarah? About Emma? Was every moment of tenderness just a performance he was putting on while his real life waited for him back home? The refrigerator held Emma's drawing, the one I had found in David's pocket, now displayed prominently with a magnet as if it were art from our own grandchildren. "I love you, Daddy David," stared back at me in those innocent block letters. A little girl who had spent 15 years believing she had the most wonderful father in the world, never knowing she was sharing him with another family. In my devastation, I felt an unexpected surge of protective fury toward this child I had never met. She was as much a victim of David's lies as I was. I crawled to the living room and sat on the floor beneath our wedding portrait, that black and white photo where we both looked so impossibly young and hopeful. David had been 25, I had been 22. I had been a virgin when I met him, had never even been in love before. He had been my first everything. First kiss, first love, first and only sexual partner, first and only husband. While other women my age had dating experience to fall back on, I had built my entire adult identity around being David Thompson's wife. The memories came flooding back with cruel clarity. All those times over the past 15 years when I had defended David to friends who suggested he seemed distant or distracted. "He's just stressed about work," I would say. Or, "He's always been the strong, silent type." I had been his unwitting accomplice, helping him maintain his cover story, making excuses for behavior that should have raised red flags. I remembered our daughter Sarah calling me 2 years ago, worried that Dad seems different somehow, like he's not really present when we visit. I had reassured her that everything was fine, that maybe she was just noticing him getting older. But the most devastating realization was how completely I had disappeared in my own life. When was the last time I had made a decision based on what I wanted rather than what would make David happy? When had I last pursued a dream or goal that wasn't somehow connected to his needs or preferences? I had become so focused on being the perfect wife that I had forgotten how to be Margaret Thompson, the woman who existed before she became Mrs. David Thompson. I cried for the woman I used to be, for the dreams I had abandoned, for the trust that had been shattered, and for the terrifying uncertainty of who I was supposed to become now that the role that had defined me for 4 decades no longer existed. On the third morning after my world collapsed, I woke up on the living room couch where I had been sleeping since David left. The tissues scattered around me were evidence of another night spent crying. But as I stared at the ceiling, something had shifted inside me. The crushing weight of betrayal was still there, but underneath it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days. Anger. Real, burning, righteous anger that cut through the fog of self-pity and gave me clarity for the first time since I'd found those photographs. I walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen and red, my hair was a mess, and I looked every one of my 67 years. But I was still here. I was still standing. David Thompson had taken 15 years of my life, stolen my money, lied to my children, and planned to destroy my reputation. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated me. I thought about the woman I used to be before I became so completely absorbed in being David's wife. I had been Margaret Sullivan then, a high school English teacher who commanded respect from teenagers and parents alike. I had organized school fundraisers, managed budgets, and dealt with difficult parents and administrators. I had been smart, capable, and resourceful. Those skills hadn't disappeared just because I had chosen to use them in service of my family instead of my career. David thought I was weak because I had been loyal. He confused my devotion with stupidity, my trust with naivety. He believed that because I had spent 40 years putting his needs first, I would simply accept whatever crumbs he chose to leave me. He expected me to quietly fade away, to accept his version of events, to let him rewrite our history as a story of a mentally unstable wife and a long-suffering husband who had no choice but to leave. But David had forgotten something crucial about the woman he married. I wasn't just a teacher. I was a high school English teacher. I had spent 15 years dealing with teenage liars, manipulators, and bullies. I knew how to spot deception, how to gather evidence, and how to expose the truth in ways that couldn't be ignored or explained away. More importantly, I had learned that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to fight back harder than they expect. I made myself a cup of coffee, not David's favorite blend that I had been automatically making for decades, but a strong, dark roast that I preferred, and sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad. If David wanted to play games with lawyers and manipulation and character assassination, he was about to discover that he wasn't the only one who could strategize. The difference was, everything I was about to do would be based on truth, while his entire plan was built on lies. I started writing a list. Things David doesn't know I know. The financial records he kept in his study. The passwords to his email accounts that I had seen him type 100 times. The friends of ours who had always liked me better than him. The business associates who respected my opinion. Our children's deep love for their mother, despite whatever seeds of doubt David thought he had planted. By the time I finished my coffee, I had filled 3 pages with information, resources, and strategies. David thought he was dealing with a broken, desperate woman who would crumble under pressure. Instead, he was about to face an adversary who knew him better than anyone else in the world and who had absolutely nothing left to lose. The Margaret Thompson who had spent 3 days crying on her living room floor was gone forever. In her place sat a woman with a mission, armed with 4 decades of intimate knowledge about David's habits, weaknesses, and secrets. I'd been the perfect wife for so long that David had forgotten I was also an intelligent woman with my own capabilities. That oversight would become his downfall. My first call was to Janet Morrison, the best divorce attorney in the state, whose daughter had been in my senior English class 12 years ago. "Mrs. Thompson," Janet said warmly when I introduced myself, "I remember you. You were the teacher who finally got Ashley to love reading." Within an hour, I was sitting in her office, methodically laying out David's financial deceptions with the same attention to detail I had once used to grade essays. Janet's eyes widened as I showed her bank statements, withdrawal records, and credit card receipts I had quietly photocopied over the years during my routine household filing. "This is financial fraud on a massive scale," she told me. "He's been stealing from marital assets to support another family. We can not only get your money back, we can make sure he pays dearly for what he's done." But I wasn't finished. My next stop was Miller and Associates, the private investigation firm that our neighbor's son ran after retiring from the police force. Within 48 hours, I had photographic evidence of David's routine visits to Sarah's house, documentation of Emma's school enrollment, listing David as her father, and records showing he had been claiming Emma as a dependent on his tax returns, tax fraud that could result in federal charges. The most satisfying part of my plan involved David's business partner, Robert Hayes. David had always been proud of their successful consulting firm, but I knew something he didn't think I knew. Robert's wife Linda and I had become friendly over the years at company social events, and she had confided in me that Robert was looking for a reason to buy David out of the partnership. Robert suspected David had been using company resources for personal expenses, but had never been able to prove it. I invited Linda for coffee and, with apparent reluctance, shared my concerns about David's recent behavior. I showed her just enough financial evidence to plant seeds of doubt about David's business ethics. "I'm worried he might have been mixing business and personal expenses," I confided, playing the role of the concerned wife perfectly. Within days, Robert had hired his own forensic accountant to examine the company books. But my masterstroke was contacting Sarah directly. I found her number in David's phone records and called her, introducing myself simply as David's wife, Margaret. The conversation that followed was surreal. Sarah genuinely believed David was divorced, that I was merely a business partner who happened to share his last name. When I sent her copies of our marriage certificate, recent photos of us together, and bank records showing David's ongoing financial obligations to me, her world shattered just as mine had. "Emma thinks David is going to marry me," Sarah whispered during our second phone conversation. "She's been planning our wedding in her head. How could he do this to her?" Sarah's heartbreak gave me an unexpected ally. She agreed to attend David's surprise anniversary party as my guest, ready to confront him publicly. But I had one more surprise planned. I had discovered that Robert Hayes' daughter went to the same private school as Emma. They were in the same grade, had been to the same birthday parties, had even had playdates together. Robert had unwittingly been socializing with David's secret family for years, never knowing the connection. David's carefully constructed lies were about to collide with each other in the most spectacular way possible. The afternoon of our 40th anniversary celebration, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror applying lipstick with hands that were surprisingly steady. I had chosen a deep red shade, bold and confident in a way I hadn't felt in years. My navy blue dress was elegant but understated, perfect for the role I was about to play. The devoted wife celebrating 4 decades of marriage, completely unaware that her world was about to explode. David had returned home that morning, acting as if nothing had changed between us. "You look beautiful, Margaret," he said, straightening his tie in the mirror beside me. "Tonight's going to be special." The casual cruelty of his performance was breathtaking. He was preparing to give the speech that would mark the end of our marriage, while I stood beside him, supposedly oblivious to his plans. The Riverside Country Club's main ballroom looked exactly as I had envisioned it weeks ago, when I was still living in blissful ignorance. White roses and baby's breath adorned every table. Soft lighting created an atmosphere of romantic celebration, and our wedding photo, enlarged and displayed on an easel near the entrance, greeted guests as they arrived. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had planned every detail of what would become David's public humiliation. Guests began arriving at 6 o'clock, each one a carefully chosen piece in the chess game I had been orchestrating. Our adult children, Michael and Sarah, flew in from Denver and Phoenix respectively, both genuinely excited to celebrate their parents' milestone anniversary. David's business partner, Robert Hayes, arrived with his wife, Linda, who gave me a meaningful look that confirmed our recent coffee conversation had planted the intended seeds of suspicion. Our pastor, Dr. Williams, was there with his wife, representing the church community where David had served as a deacon for 15 years. Longtime neighbors, college friends, and family members filled the room with warmth, laughter, and conversation, creating the perfect backdrop for what was about to unfold. They had no idea they were about to witness the destruction of everything they thought they knew about David and Margaret Thompson. At precisely 7:15, Sarah Miller walked through the main entrance with Emma beside her. I had coached Sarah carefully on her entrance. She was to introduce herself to anyone who asked as a colleague of Margaret's from her teaching days, and Emma as her daughter, who was excited to meet David. Watching David's face when he spotted them across the room was worth every sleepless night I had endured planning this moment. The color drained from his cheeks as he realized his two worlds were about to collide in the most spectacular way possible. Janet Morrison, my divorce attorney, sat at a corner table disguised as a family friend, ready to serve papers the moment David's public facade crumbled. The private investigator I had hired was working as part of the catering staff, positioned with cameras to document everything that was about to happen. Even the anniversary slideshow I had prepared was loaded and ready, complete with very special additions that David had never seen. As guests took their seats for dinner, I caught Robert Hayes staring at Emma with a puzzled expression. Recognition was dawning on his face. This was the little girl from his daughter's birthday parties, the child he had seen playing at the school where his own daughter attended. The pieces were falling into place exactly as I had planned. David raised his champagne glass to begin his toast, completely unaware that he was about to deliver his final performance as the beloved husband and respected businessman he pretended to be. David stood confidently at the head table, champagne glass raised, his voice carrying across the room with practiced charm. 40 years ago, I married my best friend, he began, and I watched the faces of our guests, family, friends, colleagues, all smiling warmly at what they believed was a genuine celebration of enduring love. Margaret has been my anchor, my support, my everything through 4 decades of life's ups and downs." The irony of his words was almost unbearable. I rose slowly from my chair, my own champagne glass in hand, and waited for him to finish his performance. When the applause died down, I smiled at our guests with the grace I had perfected over 40 years of being the perfect wife. "Thank you, David, for those beautiful words," I said, my voice steady and warm. I thought tonight would be the perfect opportunity to share some memories of our incredible journey together. I've prepared a little slideshow that tells the story of our love. The lights dimmed as the first images appeared on the large screen behind us. Our wedding day, young and radiant. David's graduation from business school. Our children's births, first steps, graduations. The audience murmured appreciatively at these tender glimpses into our family history. David relaxed visibly, thinking he was safe, that this was just another element of the anniversary celebration he had been dreading. Then the photos changed. The first image of David with Sarah and Emma appeared on the screen, and I heard sharp intakes of breath from around the room. David's face went white as he realized what was happening, but I continued speaking as if nothing unusual was occurring. "These are some more recent family photos," I said conversationally. "David with Sarah Miller and their daughter Emma. They've been together for 15 years now." The room was dead silent except for the soft click of photos advancing automatically. Images flashed across the screen in rapid succession. David and Emma at Disney World, Sarah wearing what appeared to be an engagement ring, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school plays. Each photo was a dagger thrust into the heart of David's carefully constructed reputation. But my masterpiece was yet to come. I had saved the most devastating revelation for last. "Robert," I called out to David's business partner, who was sitting frozen in shock. "I believe you recognize little Emma from these photos. Isn't she in the same class as your daughter Jessica at Brookfield Academy?" Robert Hayes stood up slowly, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. That's Emma Thompson from Jessica's class. She's been to our house for birthday parties. We've had play dates." His voice trailed off as the implications hit him. "David, you told me you didn't have any other children. You've been claiming her as a dependent on company insurance forms." The room erupted. Michael and Sarah, our adult children, stared at the screen in disbelief. Sarah, Miller, who had been sitting quietly at her assigned table, stood up with tears streaming down her face. "He told me he was divorced," she said, her voice breaking. "He said you were just business partners. Emma thinks he's going to marry me." Dr. Williams, our pastor, was shaking his head in disgust. David's reputation as a church deacon, a respected businessman, a devoted family man, it was all crumbling in real time. But I wasn't finished yet. "The really interesting part," I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos, "is that David has been funding this second family with money stolen from our joint accounts. $400,000 over 15 years. Money that was supposed to be our retirement fund, our grandchildren's college fund, our security." David finally found his voice. "Margaret, please, we can discuss this privately." "Privately?" I interrupted. "Like you discussed your plans to divorce me and claim I was mentally unstable. Like you discussed stealing my life savings. Like you discussed destroying my reputation while you played happy family with someone else?" The truth was finally out, and there was nowhere left for David to hide. The aftermath of that anniversary dinner unfolded like a perfectly choreographed symphony of justice, each consequence flowing naturally from David's years of deception and manipulation. Within hours of the public exposure, Janet Morrison served David with divorce papers right there in the country club parking lot, while shocked guests whispered and stared from the windows. The man who had planned to claim I was mentally unstable now looked genuinely unhinged himself. His face flushed red as he shouted accusations and denials that no one believed. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed. Janet's forensic accountant had traced every stolen dollar, every fraudulent transaction, every lie David had told to cover his tracks. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. David was forced to liquidate his half of the consulting business to repay the marital funds he had stolen, plus penalties and interest. Robert Hayes, disgusted by the revelation that his business partner had been defrauding both the company and his wife, bought out David's shares for a fraction of their actual value. But the financial ruin was only the beginning. The IRS launched an investigation into David's tax fraud, claiming Emma as a dependent while she lived with another woman, using company resources for personal expenses, failing to report the full extent of his income. Federal charges were filed, and David faced the possibility of prison time on top of everything else. Sarah Miller's relationship with David ended the night of the anniversary party. She had packed her bags and Emma's belongings before David even made it back to her house, leaving behind only a letter that, according to my private investigator, simply said, "Emma deserves better than a father who lies about everything, including her existence." Sarah moved back to her home state of Oregon, taking Emma far away from the wreckage of David's lies. Through our brief correspondence, I learned that Emma had been devastated to discover she wasn't David's only child, that there were older siblings who had never known she existed. The social consequences were perhaps the most satisfying to watch unfold. David's resignation from the church board was swift and final. Dr. Williams made it clear that a man who had lived a double life for 15 years while serving as a deacon had no place in church leadership. Neighbors who had once envied our perfect marriage now crossed the street to avoid David when he walked by. The country club quietly suggested he might be more comfortable elsewhere. Our adult children's reactions surprised me with their fierce protectiveness. Michael flew back from Denver and stayed with me for 2 weeks, helping me change locks, close joint accounts, and navigate the emotional aftermath. Sarah, my daughter, was furious in a way I had never seen before. "How could he plan to destroy your reputation?" she kept asking. "How could he lie to us about you having memory problems when he was the one living a lie?" As for me, I discovered reserves of strength I never knew existed. I kept the house. David couldn't afford to fight for it after repaying what he had stolen. I returned to substitute teaching, finding joy in the classroom that I had forgotten during my decades of domestic devotion. I joined a hiking group, took a painting class, and planned a trip to Italy, something David had always vetoed because he didn't like foreign food. At 67, I was starting over, and for the first time in 40 years, I was living entirely for myself. The woman who had been invisible in her own marriage was finally, fully visible to herself. David had taken years from my life, but he hadn't taken my future. That belonged entirely to me now. 6 months after that anniversary dinner that changed everything, I was sitting in my favorite cafe in downtown, grading papers for my substitute teaching assignment, when I saw David through the window. He was walking alone, looking older and smaller somehow, carrying himself with the defeated posture of a man who had lost everything that mattered to him. For a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. Then I remembered the calculated cruelty of his plan to destroy my reputation, and the feeling passed. The truth is, David's betrayal taught me lessons I never expected to learn at 67 years old. I had spent 40 years believing that loyalty without question was love, that sacrificing my own dreams and desires was what good wives did, that being needed was the same as being valued. I confused enabling with caring, compliance with devotion. I had been so focused on being the perfect wife that I forgot to be a whole person. The most painful realization wasn't that David had cheated on me. It was that I had cheated myself. I had disappeared so completely into the role of David's wife that when that role was taken away, I barely remembered who Margaret Sullivan had been before she became Mrs. David Thompson. I had allowed myself to become a supporting character in my own life story, believing that my worth was measured entirely by how well I served someone else's happiness. But here's what I discovered in the ashes of my destroyed marriage. It's never too late to reclaim yourself. At an age when many women feel invisible, I finally became visible to the person who mattered most. Me. The strength I thought I had lost was still there, just buried under decades of putting everyone else's needs first. The intelligence I had channeled into making David's life comfortable was still sharp enough to outmaneuver him when it mattered. Emma, David's daughter with Sarah, sent me a letter last month. She's now living in Oregon with her mother, and while she struggled with learning the truth about her father, she wanted to thank me for being brave enough to tell the truth, even when it was hard. She wrote that her mother had explained how I could have chosen to hurt them out of anger, but instead I had treated them as fellow victims of David's deception. That letter sits framed on my kitchen table, a reminder that choosing truth over comfortable lies is always the right path, even when it's painful. I've learned that real love doesn't require you to disappear. It doesn't demand that you give up your dreams, your identity, or your financial security to prove your devotion. A partner who truly loves you wants you to be whole, complete and independent, not diminished and dependent. The person who asks you to make yourself smaller to make them feel bigger isn't someone who deserves your loyalty. Today, I wake up each morning and make coffee exactly the way I like it. I read books that interest me, travel to places that call to my soul, and spend time with people who value my thoughts and opinions. I'm building new friendships, pursuing interests I had abandoned, and discovering parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. I'm not bitter about the years I lost. I'm grateful for the years I have left to live authentically. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to start over, to walk away from what's familiar but toxic, and to choose our own happiness over someone else's comfort. Your worth isn't determined by how much you're willing to sacrifice for others. It's determined by how much you value yourself. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted David privately or exposed him publicly? Have you ever lost yourself in trying to be perfect for someone else? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in life's most challenging moments.